Hello and welcome to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. I'm Helly and I'm here to provide regular bursts of information and inspiration, some neuroscience applicable to eating disorder recovery, perhaps a few rants, but otherwise lots of positivity with a bit of a feck it attitude, some fun and a sprinkling of fabulousness to help everyone find freedom in recovery. Hi, and thank you for listening to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. My name's Helly. I'm an eating disorder recovery coach working with people in recovery from eating disorders and disordered eating. This podcast provides short little bursts of information and inspiration relating to eating disorder recovery for anybody out there at the moment going through the very, very difficult process that recovery is. In today's episode, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the phenomenon that is extreme hunger in eating disorder recovery. And one thing that I always used to have to come back to when I was experiencing those extreme levels of hunger in recovery was the saying that feast always follows famine. Now, obviously, the saying feast follows famine is quite an old saying. To be honest, I don't know how old it is or where it started, but these old sayings that have existed for many years, they exist because they are true. So in eating disorder recovery, you've usually been restricting for quite some period of time, and whatever level of restriction that was, and whether that was restricting through purely restricting on your eating, or whether it was also restricting in terms of maybe eating more but compensating for your eating in some way so that ultimately your body didn't have the resources it needed. Your body doesn't understand why you have put it into this famine situation. All it understands is that there's not enough food around, and so it's in a situation of not having enough nutrients, not enough energy to keep going as much as it needs to. So when your body does start to understand that food's available again to it, when you start to eat a little bit more again, the body and the brain will wake up to the fact that there's food available again. It doesn't understand why. It doesn't understand this is eating disorder recovery and that's why food's available. All it understands is there wasn't enough food available and now there is. And the brain is going to just think, okay, there's food available now, we've got to eat it while it's still there. And so in eating disorder recovery, you will almost definitely get these urges to eat in a feast-like way, to eat in an extreme-like way, to eat more than anybody thinks a human is capable of. And that's okay. Because a lot of people in eating disorder recovery, when they get these urges to feast eat, when that happens and you think you're broken because you're hungry all the time and those thoughts of food will just never switch off, whether it's night or day, those thoughts of food are just constant. And even when your stomach is stretched to a painfully full limit where you think you've eaten so much food and you couldn't put another thing inside your stomach, yet you still want to keep eating, you are going to think, wow, I must be broken, but you're not broken. So when those times come on you and you're thinking, I really don't know how I can keep on eating as much as I want to keep on eating. I don't know if my body can take more food, but I'd want to keep eating more food. Just remember the saying, feast always follows famine. And those urges to feast eat, the constant thoughts of food, which is obviously mental hunger, and the ways that your body seems to be driving you just to keep eating, even when you have just eaten more than anyone could think possible. These are all very normal physiological responses to a famine situation. Anybody coming out of what it perceives a famine situation where it's not been given enough food for a period of time, and that can be, in people without eating disorders, that can be somebody who's just had a stomach virus for a few days. Or it can be to the other extreme of someone who's had an eating disorder for many years and not eaten enough. Anybody who's not had enough food for any period of time will need to eat afterwards to make up for it. So, okay, somebody who's had gastric flu, for just a few days, and so they've gone into a slight energy deficit through that. If you observe them, they'll probably eat like a demon for a few days once they're on the path to recovery from that gastric flu. And, their body then will go back into a sort of more equilibrium state, and they won't have those urges to keep eating more than they normally eat again. And they'll just go back to their normal levels of hunger and eating. But for somebody who's had an eating disorder for many, many years, who's in a malnourished state because of that, those urges to feast eat are going to go on for a very, very, very long time, because the body's got so much repair work to do. It's got so much catching up to do in all the years that it's been denied the food and the energy it's needed. So these urges to feast eat, we use the term extreme hunger in eating disorder recovery to describe it, because that's ultimately what it is. The body's coming out of starvation and it's extremely hungry. It wants all the food as soon as possible, and it's going to send you seemingly never-ending signals to feast eat, no matter how much you've already eaten in the last hour. And that's entirely normal, and that's entirely okay. And it's not only okay to respond to those urges to eat, it's going to do everything for your recovery. Because the body driving a person to feast eat is just doing its job, trying to keep you alive and become as healthy as you can possibly be. So don't resist those urges to feast. Flow with them and use them as your golden ticket to recovery. And yes, I know the contradicting hunger signals between a very full and sluggish belly trying to keep up with a brain that's screaming at you for food are really confusing and very distressing at times. But listen to your brain when it's asking you for more food, because ultimately your brain is the intellect of the body, and your belly will catch up with the brain. I do know all too well that the urges to feast eat can be confusing, and of course, because you have an eating disorder, you have also the very irrational but very real fear response to eating or weight gain, which make those urges to eat so much absolutely terrifying. But be as brave as you can. Know that eating is always the answer, and just go with it. Remember, these urges to eat are normal, and just try and even enjoy eating as much as you can. Go with this drive to eat everything in sight. Because these urges to eat thousands and thousands and thousands of calories a day, as your body gains enough fuel, and as your body heals, and as your body learns to trust you or continue to feed it, these urges to eat everything in sight will gradually go down over time. So remember the saying, feast follows famine. And the only other point I would make is that if you are not getting high urges to eat, but you are in a state of restriction, then I would lay bets that you are not eating enough for the body to trust you sufficiently yet to send the feast eating signals, or that you are blocking them through chronically high cortisol levels coming from the stress, the anxiety, perhaps coming from overexercise. So if that's the situation, if you're not getting these urges to feast eat, you have to start eating more despite the low hunger, and eat what your body is craving without judgment. And you really do need to try and rest as much as possible to let the stress go down, let your cortisol levels come down, so that then your body can not only send you those hunger signals, but you can actually hear them as well. And when you do that, when you start to eat, when you rest, when you let your cortisol settle, then your brain will begin to trust that food is available. And I would lay bets then that hunger will fire up just like it does in everyone else. And I know you'll probably still be sceptical about feast eating when coming out of a state of starvation or energy deficit of any kind, because yes, we live in a society that frowns upon feeding a body adequately. But when you get caught up in the diet culture nonsense that's always out there in terms of how much a human body should eat, just remember the men from the Minnesota Starvation Study. Now, if you don't know about the Minnesota Starvation Study, I'll try and make an episode about it in the future, so let me know if you want me to do that. But the men in the Minnesota Starvation Study, who had only had a period of semi-starvation for quite a short period of time in comparison to somebody who's had an eating disorder for years. Those men coming out of that semi-starvation state ate up to and above 10,000 calories a day, and that level of extreme eating lasted between 6 months for some of them and over 2 years for others, before they became what might be considered normal eaters in inverted commas again. So, just be reassured by that. These men didn't have eating disorders, but they needed to eat to that extreme level after just a short period of semi-starvation. At the end of the day, learn to trust your body. Let it guide you. It's not trying to trick you. Don't judge it, and just let it guide you. Enjoy the feast eating. Enjoy this time. It can be fun if you let it be fun. You can have so much fun with all the incredible food that you want to eat and you can eat now. Do that, and with time you will recover. Your body will repair and your brain will rewire. And yes, it can be a painful and difficult process, but your brain will heal and you'll find freedom at the other side of all of this. So I urge you, if you've got any desire to feast eat today, go right now and grab all those foods you're dreaming about and just get stuck into them all and enjoy it. Thank you for listening to my podcast. I'm Helly. I'm an eating disorder recovery coach. If you want to know more about me or my coaching, please check out my website on www.hellybarnes.com. And otherwise, I will catch you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. Don't forget, eating disorder recovery doesn't have to be boring and doesn't have to be serious. Now go and grab yourself some food and have a fabulous rest of the day.